Have you ever stood on a stage while your own mother tried to extort you in front of 300 people? Picture the grand ballroom of a downtown Seattle hotel, chandeliers dripping light over tailored tuxedos and state senators sipping champagne. It was my brother Nathaniel's wedding. My mother stood under that chandelier holding a microphone in one hand and a glowing tablet in the other, and she had just called me to the stage. With a syrupy smile, she told 300 guests I had a surprise for the bride and groom. She wanted me to press my thumb to that screen and sign over my $4 million penthouse as a wedding gift. I leaned into the microphone and said no. Her palm cracked across my face so hard the orchestra stopped mid-note. I didn't cry. I rolled my jaw, turned my back on her, and walked out through the rain onto the terrace where I dialed a number and said 2 words. It's time. An hour later, the doors flew open, and a man in a mobility chair rolled down the aisle, flanked by a lawyer and a federal investigator, and my mother's whole empire came apart in front of everyone she'd ever tried to impress. But to understand how a wedding became a crime scene, you have to go back 2 years. My name is Grace Bennett. I'm the director of logistics at a shipping firm, and I built everything I have from nothing. My own tuition, my own 60-hour weeks, my own apartment. My brother Nathaniel was the golden child, the one who failed 2 startups my parents bankrolled and called it finding himself. When I got promoted, my mother texted a thumbs-up emoji. When Nathaniel took a sabbatical, they threw him a party at a Michelin star restaurant. So, when Nathaniel got engaged to Isabel, a woman who treated wealth like oxygen, I wasn't surprised when my mother, Diane, slid a leather binder across a lunch table and informed me I'd be covering the $50,000 rehearsal dinner because I was the successful one. I slid it back and said no. Her smile stayed frozen, but her eyes went to glass and she told me I'd regret it. That refusal lit a fuse that would eventually burn their whole lives down. The harassment started immediately. Guilt-trip texts from Nathaniel, passive-aggressive emails from my father Walter about sacrifice and selfishness. I didn't budge. In logistics, you learn to cut a failing route instead of feeding it more resources, and my family was a failing route. So, I went to the one person in the family who spoke my language, my grandfather Augustus, a retired shipping magnate confined to a wheelchair after a mild stroke but sharper than anyone at the table. I visited him every Sunday. My parents visited once a month to hint at their inheritance. The morning after a disastrous dinner where my mother accused me of having a cold corporate heart for refusing to fund imported peonies, I told Augustus everything. He listened, knocked over his own chess king, and told me my parents had been bleeding him dry for months. Then he pulled a thick envelope from a lock box and told me he was signing over the deed to his crown jewel, a 5,000-square-foot penthouse 40 stories above the city, to me. Immediately, irrevocably, and in total secrecy. The penthouse was a fortress, biometric thumbprint locks, a rotating digital passcode, $500,000 of security specifically installed to keep family out. I moved in quietly over 3 months, hiring movers at midnight, keeping my old lease as a decoy. For 90 days, I lived life. Logistics by day, silence above the clouds by night. While my family spiraled through 6-figure floral budgets and Italian tuxedos, the illusion held until a charity gala when an old family broker named Franklin congratulated my mother in front of everyone on gifting the penthouse to me. My mother's champagne flute froze halfway to her lips. She turned, found my eyes across the room, and in that single second understood everything. Her father-in-law had cut her out, and the quiet daughter now held the keys to the family's crown jewel. The war moved into daylight. At the engagement party, my father dragged me into a private library and informed me with corporate cruelty that my grandfather was slipping, and the transfer was a dementia mistake I needed to correct. My mother played peacemaker, insisting I didn't need that much space. Isabel burst in mid-argument and staged tears, and Nathaniel called me a bitter, jealous spinster in front of everyone. My mother delivered the ultimatum: sign the deed over by month's end or be erased from the family. I told her ghosts, don't write checks, and I walked out. That night, my building's security log showed someone had tried to get a replacement key card that afternoon claiming to be the new resident. The name on the incident report was Nathaniel's. The siege had gone physical. When the front door wouldn't budge, my mother went for my reputation instead. She hosted a luncheon and told 50 influential women that I manipulated an asset. The rumor reached my industry within a week, and the client's board started murmuring about elder exploitation, and I nearly lost a major contract before pulling out the numbers and forcing them to choose between gossip and profit. I won that round, but the campaign had a purpose beyond humiliation. It was building a legal case. When I drove to visit my grandfather and found his door locked, a nurse told me my father had come by with a team of lawyers. I realized Walter wasn't just spreading rumors. He was laying groundwork to have Augustus declared incompetent and seize control of his estate. I extracted my grandfather that same day quietly and completely using a private medical transport company and a rehabilitation facility in California under an alias. My mother called the next morning shrieking about kidnapping. I told her flatly that he'd relocated for his health and all communication would run through his attorneys. 3 days later, my brother stormed into my office mid-negotiation, disheveled and frantic, and blurted that if our father couldn't get Augustus to sign new trust papers, the wedding was ruined because the bank was going to pull the collateral. That sentence cracked the whole case open. A wedding doesn't need collateral unless the debt behind it is enormous. I spent that night auditing my own family like a hostile account, cross-referencing corporate ledgers, shell company filings, and vendor payments. I found it. My father, using minor signatory authority over tertiary accounts, had spent 3 years funneling money through phantom vendors to fund Nathaniel's failed startups and the family's entire lifestyle. The total exceeded $4 million, and the annual corporate audit was less than a month away. To survive it, my father needed to replace the stolen money fast, and traditional banks don't lend millions to a man with no collateral and a dying credit score. So, he turned to a private, unregulated shadow lender, the kind that moves in days but demands pristine, unmortgaged real estate as security. They needed the Penthouse, not for Nathaniel and Isabel to host charity galas to cover a felony before the auditors arrived with the wedding as their deadline. I called Augustus and read him the whole ledger. His voice went from tired to razor cold. He told me not to call the authorities yet. He wanted them cornered, believing they still had a chance so they wouldn't see the strike coming. He told me to go to the rehearsal dinner, absorb whatever they threw at me, and let them dig their own grave while his legal team quietly prepared the case. I did. At the dinner, my father drank himself pale while my mother darted between guests in a manic, brittle performance. In the powder room, she cornered me, dropped a manila folder on the counter, and threatened to leak a fabricated embezzlement dossier to my board unless I handed over the passcode by the wedding reception. I dried my hands, folded the towel, and walked out without a word. That night, I sent one message to my grandfather's attorney. The trap is set. Be ready tomorrow. The wedding day arrived cold and clear. 300 guests filled the ballroom. Senators, executives, old money, completely unaware they were financing a federal crime with every glass of stolen money champagne. My mother seated me at the farthest table as a public demotion. It gave me a perfect, unobstructed view of the stage. Through dinner, I watched my father sweat through his tuxedo, checking his phone every few minutes, waiting on the shadow lender. After the toasts, my mother took the microphone, delivered a saccharine speech about sisterly devotion, then called my name across the silent room. Refusing to walk up would have branded me the bitter spinster forever, so I stood and walked the endless aisle to the stage. She wrapped her arm around me like an embrace, her nails digging into my side, and announced to thunderous applause that I was gifting the penthouse to the newlyweds. A waiter presented a glowing tablet on a silver tray. Biometric scanner lit, waiting for my thumb. Under the cover of the applause, my mother pressed her mouth to my ear and hissed that the courier was waiting to rush the transfer to the lender, that I had to do it now or she'd destroy me on Monday. I looked at the tablet, looked at 300 expectant faces, and instead of touching the screen, I pulled the microphone from its stand. The applause died. I said calmly that the penthouse belonged to my grandfather and me, that it was not mine to give and not theirs to steal. The silence that followed was total. My mother's face disintegrated and she swung. Her palm cracked across my cheek so hard the sound rang through the speakers and a glass shattered somewhere in the crowd. I didn't flinch. I looked her dead in the eye, turned, and walked off that stage into the cold night air, where I made one phone call. They did it. Bring it all down. 10 minutes later, the ballroom doors crashed open, and my grandfather rolled in flanked by his attorney and a federal investigator, dressed sharp. Lucid and furious. My mother dropped the microphone with a shriek. My father simply collapsed into his chair. Augustus took the mic, and in front of every guest my mother had ever tried to impress, laid it all out. The phantom vendors, the $4 million theft, the shadow loan, the deadline built around the wedding, the fabricated dimension narrative, the blackmail attempt against me. He revealed that every plate of Wagyu, every imported orchid, every custom tuxedo in that room had been paid for with stolen money, and that the tablet on stage had been wired directly to the lender's automated escrow system. My refusal to press my thumb to that screen had let the midnight deadline expire and voided the loan entirely. Isabel's father stood, marched to the head table, warned Nathaniel never to contact his daughter again, and pulled her out by the arm. She yanked off her ring and hurled it at Nathaniel's chest before storming out. The rest of the guests fled within minutes, abandoning half-eaten plates rather than be photographed at the scene of a federal fraud. The investigator escorted my parents out to be questioned. The empire collapsed in under 10 minutes. 3 months later, I sat in a federal courtroom gallery watching my parents in prison jumpsuits at the defense table. Stripped of every asset, denied bail as flight risks, facing counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and thanks to Augustus filing his own charges, felony elder abuse and extortion. Nathaniel lost everything, too. His marriage annulled within days, his accounts frozen as fruit of stolen money, his old friends ghosting him the moment the indictment hit the news. Last I heard, he was working the overnight shift at a warehouse in the suburbs, scanning returns for minimum wage. A life about as far from a penthouse as you can get. As for me, the story that was supposed to end my career made it. Every executive who watched me take a public slap and refused to fold saw something more valuable than an apology. They saw someone who couldn't be shaken, and offers and contracts followed. I live in that penthouse, still with Augustus recovering steadily in the guest suite. Our mornings full of coffee, chess, and quiet conversations about shipping routes instead of threats. I think often about how much of my life I spent believing blood required infinite forgiveness. That loyalty was owed no matter the cost. It isn't. Blood makes you related. Respect and boundaries make you family. If you're sitting at a table right now shrinking yourself to keep someone else comfortable, you don't owe them your sanctuary. You're allowed to lock the door, reset the passcode, and finally breathe. Take a moment to comment your city or country. I love connecting with you all. Thank you for listening and supporting, and be sure to subscribe for more stories. More are coming your way soon. Until next time, stay kind to yourself and stay strong.